We are live.
So welcome to our media availability today, our media briefing and access to the public. Hope everybody can hear me. We've got a few loud voices here this morning or this afternoon. Today we had Senator Lee and Congresswoman Mia Love was on the floor and addressed us. We were able to ask some questions, and we got some answers on federal issues. So we were glad to have our federal representatives here. We are at halfway point today, I understand at noon. It's all downhill from at noon today. And to celebrate, we have Robert Gertke has worn his halfway coat. Make sure we get that viewed. It's a lovely coat. So we'll go ahead and, without further ado, take any questions from our media representatives.
Quiet day. Let's go use the PTA.
Wow.
Any questions?
President, they were all at the press release this morning on the Justice Reform Program, and I'm sure they have plenty for stories today, so they're saving their questions till tomorrow.
Well, how do you feel about the comment that Rich Pyatt is the only real person that understands the issues?
Just for fun, Gallup released a thing a little while ago saying that it looks at how Republican and Democratic states are. May not surprise you, but Utah's number 2 most Republican state, according to them.
Next to Idaho? Wyoming.
So,
Okay.
you want to chime in on why that is? If you're aiming for number 1 or why you think we're so Republican?
I guess there's just hope for us.
They have decided that Wyoming also.
They don't call it that, but they have
They
it.
don't call it that, but that they have it.
Well, I don't think that's something we're necessarily striving for. I think that's something that happens. And I think it's mostly cultural for us, a pretty conservative state, and they elect conservative representatives usually.
We pretty much reflect our constituents and free markets. I think that's something that our constituents probably believe in. Probably why our economy's doing so well.
You said the budget numbers are coming out this afternoon. Could you give us a budget numbers 101 for constituents who might want to understand why this is significant?
We have
What
the
happens?
Budget 101 person with us, the ultimate.
Well, let me explain it this way. The budget process it really starts in October and November. And the governor has a list of private advisors outside his office. The legislature has private advisors, and they meet separately, and they agree to what figures are, what's unemployment, what's house construction, what's all those things. Then they meet together and just kind of go through their figures to make sure that they're singing off the same page. And then they separate again and come up with what they think the revenue projections are, and they meet a second time, and this time they come to agreements as to what they're going to be. And we announced that like the 1st of December, which becomes really our basis to do the session. The trouble with that is it does not include the sales tax and the income tax that's accrued during December. The sales tax is not paid until the last day of January for the Christmas time, so that's the new sales tax figure that come in. In addition, these figures are based on basically what the economy was in October. And so now they have November, December, and January to look at the income tax coming in. And if you've been following that at all, you know the income tax collections are much higher than we projected. Again, we're trying to figure out whether that's a bubble or whether something really has changed in that. So now we have these latest figures today, and that's what we'll finally close the budget on. It involves two budgets in itself. First of all, we're in the middle of fiscal year 15. It started on July 1st of 14, it'll end on June 30th of 15. And so they're looking at the projections we took a year ago and they may come back and say, we're over, under, about the same. If they say we're over, that adds more one-time money into our budget because we just know this year it'll be in, plus the money we had in the bank at the end of last year. So those two figures create what we use as one-time money. The ongoing, they'll adjust their figures and say, instead of saying 325 million, we think it's going to be 400, or we think it's going to be 200. So we have those figures. Now we can finally make the big decisions, because the big decisions we haven't made yet that are dependent is, number one, what are we going to fund public education? If you listened to executive appropriations last night, I thought Representative D really put it in perspective when he said, you know, you've asked for roughly $170 million, but no request for WPU. If you add WPU in there, and the figure I use is $26 million at 1%, if you put in a 6% increase in the WPU, that'll put almost 160 million in the figure. So if you take 160 plus what they've asked for, all the money's gone. And so we have to make that balance. The other big item we have to decide will be compensation. What are we going to, and talk about the criminal justice, there'll be many of those other positions that we're going to have to present it to as higher education, what all those are. So now the crunch time is we have the parameters of what we have to spend and what those issues are, and then we can start filling in the blanks. And I would hope that fairly soon we can have the big rocks decided, what the WPU is, what the compensation, those big items, so we get those off the table, and then we can worry about, as I think Representative Ron Bigelow called them, the dogs and the cats. Those other things you have to put in the budget as you finish up, but always, always, always the goal is to have a balanced budget.
Can you say what you think the budget says about the legislature's priorities this year? Are there some priorities that you think are going to really stand out?
Well, I can guarantee you, public education always is, always will, always be our number one priority. The question is how can you fit in other priorities around that? My rule of thumb is just basically looking at the budget. If we have new revenue of $300 million, half of that will go to public ed. That's pretty well. Usually they get more than that, but that's usually kind of a rule of thumb. I think the next issue, higher ed, ties closely to that. Health and Human Services is a committee. I don't know, Representative Senator Davis, if you serve on that committee or not, but that's a very difficult committee. And when you heard Senator Stevenson and Representative Ray last night make their presentation, you look over that list, and there's many things there. So that's generally general fund. One of the real challenges we have in budgets is that our Constitution requires all income tax to be spent for public and higher education. And so if your increase is 80% income tax and 20% general fund, I can take the general fund and put it all in public ed if that's the choice of the body, but I can't take any of the income tax money and put it over in the general fund things. Now we do some switching with a little bit of money that's in higher ed, but basically we're pretty true to that.
I think I maybe should have gone beyond what I asked and asked you beyond education. What are some of the priorities that you're thinking you might be able to get to this year?
Well, I think I think one thing that's going to be a really big item is what are we going to do about transportation? As you know, the governor has wanted to take some of the money that we've dedicated in sales tax out of roads and probably replace it in some form with gasoline tax. I think that's going to be a big issue. I think the issue others is the criminal justice. I think Senator Adams is kind of spearheading that on those. Those are the kinds of issues I think we do in the budget. Obviously, there's going to be the issue of anti-discrimination, the firing squad or whatever that gets all the publicity, but these basic funding things are what really becomes our main emphasis. And it's going to be interesting as we look over the list and talk to our caucus what items may prop up as being higher than we may just guess right now. But I like to take the fact that our budget is pretty transparent. It's done in committees. You have tough votes. You followed it. We've cut public ed one day. We've added public ed. It's just part of the process that makes it so hard for people to understand what we're doing. But I think at the end of the day, you'll find that everyone has some say in it. Probably everyone, including myself, is not happy with exactly how it comes out. but that's the process. And I think to take 104 legislators, none of us professional legislators, every one of us have other jobs. We work here together with different views. To see that we come back with a balanced budget is absolutely remarkable. And I think Senator Davis would say that he, as the minority party, are involved in the decisions and have some input. It's a remarkable thing that we do it as well as we do.
Last question, is the decline in energy prices going to have any measurable impact on this year's budget?
I think I'll find out in about 5 hours. But true, that's a concern because of the employment. But on the other hand, people are arguing that because of less money for gas, people have more spending money and they're buying more things. So we would anticipate that a bump could be the sales tax goes up. But that's what we pay these people the idea. Can you imagine trying to figure out what the economy is going to be like 6 months to 18 months from now? And they do a remarkably good job in putting all those factors together.
The impact would be huge, I think, with the energy prices down. We experienced that in 1985 when the bottom fell out of the oil market, and it was devastating to budgets here in Utah. We went into a recession for 3 or 4 years, but our economy is completely different now. We are one of the most diverse economies in the country, and proactively the governor's office and the legislature have tried to steer us towards not relying on just a specific industry, especially in the oil and gas industry or the coal industry, because they have their ups and downs. And so we're going to get some positives from lower gas prices. That's going to lift part of the economy. Although you go out into Vernal, you're going to see a huge decrease in what happens out in that area. So we think that that's going to at least balance itself out and maybe even more to the positive because we have such a diversity of economy now.
I'm always amazed when these numbers come out because we do our budget, like Lyle said, a year in advance. That what happens is we get one-time money and ongoing money. And I'm amazed at how that is spun. It's like getting a raise and making it retroactive a year, so you get $1,000 raise. And so it's the last year you get $1,000 for, and then you get $1,000 ongoing. But everyone says that's a $2,000 increase in our budget, so people think we got a $2,000 raise rather than $1,000. And those numbers are always spun, and it looks like we have more money than we really do. And that's always interesting to me. It seems like it's always spun that way, and probably never end. But like Lyle said, when you take the ongoing money, a lot of it's already committed.
Any questions for our viewers?
No.
Any other questions from the press?
Are you still looking at sort of socking away the $116 million of ongoing as one time? I know that was the motion of VAC last time you met. Was it December or was it prior to that?
I can just say, I think if the revenues are up, that shows more a bubble, or maybe more than that. That's all part of the mixture and consideration we put together.
Okay, so you could end up putting more in. Does that make it difficult to, the governor's budget obviously didn't do that. Not only did it not do that, I guess he had $100 million in road money and $10 million in cigarette tax money.
There's
seemed to be kind of.
There's a lot of ways for us to deal with that. One of the things that we can do is capital improvement fund, which was used to be called AR&I. We build a lot of buildings for the state, and then to just maintain those buildings, put a new roof on, put a new seal coat on this parking lot. The HVAC system needs to be repaired or upgraded. And we have had a policy of 1.1% of the value of those buildings put into a fund to keep them up. And if you don't do that, being an owner of buildings, you're going to have deferred maintenance and it's going to be a disaster down the road. And we've been funding that with one-time funds. And so that's, $60 million? We shouldn't ever get out of here without taking at least $60 million and making it ongoing in there, because in a downturn, guess what? that's a good place for us to go and move money over to education, education harmless, and some other things. So we'll be looking for ways to do that as part of this, it'd be included as part of this set aside, just making some good choices and some funding that we could always, peel back if anything goes down, or, when we go into another down cycle.
It was the key that saved us in 2008, is the fact we take ongoing revenue we put in roads and buildings and move that over to save cuts in, especially public ed.
Yeah, that's where we do it.
I guess the question is that you're at least about $225 million apart in terms of the numbers you're actually working off of to start. And so when he sets out his priorities and sets expectations of the 6.25% WPU increase, is that realistic from when you guys start your process this afternoon?
It's all part of the negotiations in the last few weeks. I'm confident we'll come together and we'll have some agreement between the governor, the House, and the Senate.
We'll know better at 5 o'clock.
Okay, no other questions? Thank you.
You're talking about tax cuts.